the Battle of Kursk, in the burning summer of 1943. The German High Command prepared for Operation Citadel, destined to become the largest tank battle in human history. After the catastrophic defeat at Stalingrad, Adolf Hitler demanded a decisive victory on the Eastern Front to reclaim the strategic initiative. The German plan was a classic pincer movement, aimed at cutting off a massive Soviet salient around the city of Kursk that extended deep into Axis lines. To execute this colossal hammer blow, Nazi Germany concentrated an elite force of nearly 800,000 soldiers, organized into two massive operational prongs. In the north, Colonel General Walter Model directed the formidable Ninth Army. In the south, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein commanded Army Group South, spearheading the attack with the elite 4th Panzer Army and Army Detachment Kempf. Together, they massed 50 highly experienced, elite divisions. The technical backbone of Citadel relied heavily on Germany's newest mechanical monsters. Berlin delayed the offensive for months, specifically to mass manufacture advanced armor to counter the rising Red Wave. For the first time on a massive operational scale, Germany deployed 147 legendary Tiger I heavy tanks and introduced 200 brand-new, advanced Panther tanks. These machines possessed devastating firepower and thick frontal plating. In addition to the modern Beikats, the armor spearhead included 90 terrifying Ferdinand heavy tank destroyers, armed with the legendary 88mm gun and protected by 200mm of frontal steel. The core of the mechanical fist still relied on upgraded variants of the reliable Panzer IV and Panzer III tanks, supported by hundreds of heavily armed Stu G3 assault guns. In total, the Wehrmacht gathered nearly 2,700 tanks and assault vehicles to secure absolute domination over the contested skies. Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring deployed the elite Luftwaffe forces, massing over 2,100 modern aircraft. The legendary Luftflotte 4 and Luftflotte 6 flew directly over the strategic sectors. German pilots operated lethal Focke-Wulf, FW-190, and Messerschmitt, Bf-109 fighters, alongside devastating Ru-87 Stuka dive bombers, specialized in cracking open the thick hulls of Soviet armor. However, the Saxe-Lesset made a catastrophic strategic error by delaying the attack to wait for the new Panther factories. This extended delay provided the Soviet Union with months of precious preparation time, guided by accurate intelligence reports that leaked the entire German plan. The Red Army constructed the most deeply fortified and layered defensive network in the history of warfare, transforming Kursk into a giant meat grinder. The Red Army constructed 8 massive defensive lines, extending up to 300 kilometers deep behind the front. Soviet civilians and engineers laid over 1 million explosive landmines, achieving a terrifying density of up to 3,000 mines per kilometer. They dug thousands of kilometers of anti-tank trenches and placed over 20,000 artillery pieces and anti-tank guns. In total, the Soviets gathered 1.9 million soldiers and nearly 5,000 tanks, under the ultimate guidance of General Erich von Manstein. Saxe-Lesset commanders believed that the qualitative superiority of their heavy Tigers and superior Panther technology could easily punch through any static obstacle. Elite Waffen-SS armored divisions, including Leibstandarte, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, were positioned at the absolute vanguard of Army Group South, ready to launch a calculated blitzkrieg action against the defense. On the tense night of July 4, 1943, Saxe-Lesset, heavy artillery units, and combat engineers moved silently into their forward jump-off positions. The air was heavy with the smell of gasoline and oil as thousands of mechanical engines idled in the dark. Suddenly, just hours before the scheduled offensive, Soviet artillery unleashed a massive preemptive bombardment, proving that the element of surprise was completely lost for the Wehrmacht. Undeterred by the preemptive Soviet artillery strike, the German armor spearheads revved their engines as the clock struck dawn on July 5, 1943. Operation Citadel had officially begun. Thousands of heavy guns opened fire, creating a terrifying wall of flame. As the Tiger tanks slowly shifted into gear and rolled forward into the dense minefields, the German warriors were about to enter the most brutal mechanical hell the world had ever seen. The Battle of Kursk, on the northern face of the massive salient. Colonel General Walter Model's Ninth Army unleashed a localized blitzkrieg action. His tactical plan relied on heavy armor, spearheaded by 45 massive Ferdinand tank destroyers and 41 Tiger tanks. Their objective was to crush the Soviet 13th Army. However, they immediately ran into a dense wall of defensive minefields and deadly pack fronts interlocking networks of Soviet anti-tank guns. Model's mechanical spearheads faced an absolute nightmare near the strategic hills of Okhovatka. The heavy Ferdinand destroyers, despite their near impenetrable 200mm frontal steel plating, suffered catastrophic structural flaws. They completely lacked built-in machine guns for close defense. Soviet infantrymen displayed suicidal bravery, jumping out of trenches to disable the steel monsters using Molotov cocktails and heavy satchel charges directly against the tracks. By July 7, 1943, the northern offensive ground into a bloody war of attrition around the heavily fortified railway station of Ponyuri. Dubbed the Stalingrad of Kursk, Ponyur witnessed ferocious hand-to-hand combat inside water towers and rail yards. Model deployed the elite 20th Panzer Division and the 18th Panzer Division, but the Soviet 2nd Tank Army launched a massive counterstrike, pinning down the German advance after a mere 12-kilometer penetration. Meanwhile, on the southern face of the salient, Field Marshal Erich von Manstein's Army Group South achieved much deeper operational momentum. The elite 2 SS Panzer Corps, consisting of the fanatical divisions Leibstandart, Das Reich, and Totenkopf, attacked with calculated ferocity, armed with over 300 modern tanks, including a high concentration of Tiger I variants. They crashed directly into the Soviet 6th Guards Army with overwhelming velocity. The technical superiority of the German Tiger tanks shone brightly on the open steppes of the southern sector. Operating their deadly 880 MKWK Sentinel guns, German crews easily obliterated Soviet T-34 and KV-1 tanks from a distance of over 2,000 meters, long before the enemy weapons could even dent the German armor. Manstein's mechanical shield pushed through the 1st and 2nd Soviet defensive lines, advancing nearly 30 kilometers deep to reinforce the SS spearhead. The Grossdeutschland Panzergrenadier Division unleashed its massive iron fist on the left flank, deployed with 129 Panzer IV tanks and the brand new Panther variants. Grossdeutschland engaged in a violent tactical duel near Cherkaskoy. However, the initial technical unreliability of the Panther tanks proved catastrophic. Out of 200 deployed, dozens spontaneously caught fire due to mechanical engine overheating. Despite the technical failures of the Panthers, the sheer operational determination of the German crews forced a tactical crisis for the Soviet command. By July 9, 1943, the elite 4th Panzer Army, under General Hermann Hoth, had successfully crossed the critical Pena River. Realizing their lines were breaking, Soviet General Nikolai Vatitin was forced to deploy his last strategic reserves, launching the formidable 1st Tank Army into the fray. Above the burning expanses of the southern front, the Luftwaffe successfully maintained a fragile aerial shield. Operating under Luftwaffe, the legendary anti-tank ace, Hans Ulrich Rudolf flew his specialized Ru-87G to Stuka Cannonbird. Armed with twin 37mm flak cannons under the wings, Rudolf led calculated, low-level hunting missions, single-handedly cracking open the thin top armor of dozens of Soviet tanks attempting to block the advance. The sheer scale of the mechanized shock movements converted the Kursk countryside into an apocalyptic wasteland. Under a heavy, choking cloud of dust and black oil smoke, hundreds of burning tanks littered the wheat fields. The intense heat of July, combined with the blistering firestorms of continuous artillery barrages, pushed the physical limits of the German soldiers to absolute exhaustion as they fought house by house through the smoke. By July 10, 1943, General Manstein's southern spearhead had successfully chewed through the main Soviet defensive networks, bypassing the heavily fortified sector of Oboyan. Armed with iron resolution, the German armored divisions redirected their operational momentum toward a small, obscure railway junction that would soon become the theater for the most violent clash of steel in military history. Their coordinates were locked onto Prokhorovka, the Battle of Kursk, on the fateful morning of July 12, 1943. The rolling fields near Prokhorovka became the arena for the most violent clash of armor in human history. General Hermann Hoth's elite 4th Panzer Army, spearheaded by the 2 SS Panzer Corps, prepared to capture the strategic railway junction. Suddenly, the sky shook as Soviet General Pavel Rotmistrov unleashed his massive strategic reserve, the fresh 5th Guards Tank Army. Over 800 Soviet tanks charged forward in a massive wave, slamming directly into nearly 300 highly advanced German armored vehicles. Rotmistrov's aggressive strategy was simple yet suicidal. Close the distance instantly to eliminate the terrifying long-range firepower of the German Tiger I tanks. The Soviet T-34 armor units advanced at top velocity, deliberately ramming their machines into the saxily set steel monsters to engage in point-blank duels. The elite SS division, Leibstandart, positioned at the absolute center of the impact zone, faced a literal wall of charging iron. German crews operated their precise 88mm and 75mm guns with mechanical discipline, firing as fast as reloading mechanisms allowed. At a distance of 1,000 meters, saxilescent shells tore through the T-34 formations, vaporizing targeted vehicles. Yet, for every Soviet tank destroyed, 3 more emerged from the smoke. The battle quickly dissolved into a chaotic, apocalyptic melee. Under a choking canopy of black smoke from burning fuel, visibility dropped to mere meters. German Tiger tanks were suddenly surrounded by nimble Soviet armor units, firing at their vulnerable side and rear plating. The constant thud of heavy shells bouncing off thick steel, combined with the agonizing screams of dying crews, turned Prokhorovka into a mechanical slaughterhouse. On the right flank of the inferno, the SS Division Das Reich mounted a brilliant, calculated defense, facing massive flanking maneuvers from the Soviet Second Guards tank corps. Das Reich deployed its tactical shield of Panzer for tanks and Stu-G3 assault guns. German gunners utilized superior positioning, knocking out dozens of T-34 units, and successfully preventing the Red Army from surrounding the core of the Saxe-Lacet armored fist. Concurrently, on the left flank, the SS Division, Totenkopf, fought a desperate, bloody engagement to secure the strategic high ground along the Sel River. Totenkopf attempted to cross the river barrier to encircle Soviet supply routes, but they ran directly into the heavily dug-in infantry of the 5th Guards Army. The battle transformed into a meat grinder, where Saxe-Lacet Panzer Grenadiers faced continuous, devastating artillery barrages. The technical resilience of the Saxe-Lacet Tigers was demonstrated during the peak hours of the melee. One single Tiger tank, commanded by SS ace Michael Wittmann, engaged a massed formation of Soviet armor. Utilizing the brutal, destructive power of his 88mm gun, Wittmann coordinated rapid-fire targets, single-handedly neutralizing several T-34 units within minutes, proving that German tactical training could withstand numerical odds. By the late afternoon of July 12, 1943, the mechanical frenzy began to slow down due to sheer mutual exhaustion. The Prokhorovka battlefield was completely blanketed by hundreds of shattered, smoking husks of steel. Over 300 Soviet tanks lay completely demolished or burning in the mud, representing a devastating blood sacrifice for Rotmistrov's army. The 2nd SS Panzer Corps, though heavily bruised, had successfully held its ground. Tactically, Prokhorovka was a defensive success for the Saxe-Lacet forces, as they had inflicted catastrophic casualties on the Soviet armor reserve, while losing only a fraction of their operational Tigers. However, strategically, the grand design of Operation Citadel was fatally broken. The German army completely lacked the necessary fresh reserves to exploit the gap, while the Red Army possessed endless waves of hidden strategic forces. As the sun slowly set behind the smoldering ruins of the battlefield, the Saxe-Lacet warriors realized that the initiative on the Eastern Front had slipped away forever. The ground still rumbled with delayed explosions from abandoned tanks, and the smell of death hung heavily over the steppe. The German armor had given everything in this titanic clash of steel. But the tactical focus was about to shift from a grand offensive into a long, brutal retreat. The Battle of Kursk, on July 13, 1943. Adolf Hitler abruptly summoned Field Marshal Erich von Manstein and Colonel General Walter Model to his Wolf's Lair headquarters. The strategic landscape had shifted drastically overnight. Allied forces had launched Operation Husky, a massive amphibious invasion of Sicily. Fearing a total collapse of the Mediterranean flank, Hitler made the fateful decision to officially cancel Operation Citadel immediately. Manstein fiercely protested Hitler's decision, arguing that his southern armored spearheads were on the absolute verge of breaking the final Soviet lines. He believed that victory at Kursk was still tactically possible if the pressure was maintained. However, Hitler remained unmoved by the general's arguments. He ordered the elite 2 SS Panzer Corps, including the vital Leibstandarte division, to immediately disengage and prepare for transport to Italy. As the German armor split its strength and began to pull back, the Soviet High Command unleashed their masterfully planned traps. The Red Army had been patiently holding vast, hidden strategic forces for this exact moment. On the northern face of the salient, Soviet General Konstantin Rokossovsky launched Operation Kutuzov. A massive wave of 1.2 million soldiers and 2,400 tanks slammed directly into the exposed, exhausted flanks of Model's 9th Army. Model's forces, heavily depleted after days of intense fighting at Paneri, were forced into a rapid and desperate defensive retreat to avoid complete encirclement. Concurrently, on the southern sector, the Soviet command unleashed Operation Rumyantsev on August 3, 1943. This massive counteroffensive aimed to completely smash Army Group South, targeted directly at the critical strategic hubs of Belgorod and the heavily fortified city of Kharkov. German Tiger and Panther tanks fought ferocious, epic rearguard actions across the open steppes to check the advancing Red Wave. Moving from one temporary defensive position to the next, Saxilus crews utilized their superior optics and long-range guns to inflict staggering losses on the charging T-34 units. Yet, the sheer numerical weight of the Soviet industrial war machine was completely unstoppable, forcing a systematic retreat. Belgorod fell to the Soviet forces on August 5th, and through exhausting, bloody, urban warfare. The strategic prize of Kharkov was officially liberated by the Red Army on August 23, 1943. This marked the definitive, total conclusion of the Battle of Kursk. The Wehrmacht had suffered a catastrophic, irrecoverable strategic blow. Over 200,000 elite German soldiers were killed, wounded, or captured, along with hundreds of irreplaceable tanks. The strategic consequences of the failure of Operation Citadel altered the entire course of World War II. For the first time on the Eastern Front, a major German summer offensive was completely defeated before achieving a tactical breakthrough. Nazi Germany's myth of mechanical invincibility was shattered forever. The Wehrmacht completely lost the strategic initiative, forced into a permanent, bloody defensive war until the end of the conflict. The Red Army's victory at Kursk proved that Soviet command, tactical doctrine, and industrial output had officially surpassed the capabilities of the Third Reich. From this moment onward, the Soviet mechanized divisions began an unstoppable westward surge that would not halt until the red flag waved over the ruins of Berlin. The fields of Kursk became the graveyard of the Wehrmacht's elite armored power, costing Germany its finest veterans. For the German soldiers who survived the mechanical inferno, the memories of Kursk remained an everlasting trauma. They had operated the most advanced machines and fought with supreme discipline, yet they were crushed by the endless weight of numbers. Under the vast, indifferent skies of the Russian steppe, thousands of abandoned, burned-out German tanks stood as silent monuments to a grand offensive that had promised victory but delivered doom. The titans of steel had clashed in the dirt and fire, and the verdict of history was written in oil and blood. The Battle of Kursk closed its final, tragic chapter, leaving behind a warning of the terrifying cost of total industrialized warfare. As the cold winds of autumn began to sweep across the devastated steppes, the broken remnants of Germany's armor rolled westward, retreating into the dark shadows of an oncoming, inevitable defeat.